fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Today we head to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where it's always sunny and always deliciously strange. We would expect nothing less from the stomping grounds of Gritty, an honorary cryptid if there ever was one. He scares us, if we're being honest, but in a way where we're also kind of excited. It's complicated. Anyhow, we're particularly concerned with a Philadelphia neighborhood known as Chestnut Hill, which Wikipedia describes as a, quote, historic and affluent part of the city. It existed before the United States did, as a village in colonial Pennsylvania. Eventually, it became part of the city of Philadelphia. Per the neighborhood's website, it was a coveted spot for early Philadelphians, because in the summertime, its higher elevation meant significantly cooler temperatures than the city center. So, as Philly grew and changed throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, this neighborhood remained popular with the high-income families who spent lots of money building beautiful homes there and hiring famous architects to do it. This is an interesting setting for a haunted house story, being both urban and old money upscale. But a haunted house story is indeed what we're bringing you. The house in question is the Baleroy Mansion, which, according to the blog phillyghost.com, was built around 1911. We say around because it's not actually clear whether the mansion itself or its carriage house was finished that year. As far as we can tell, one of them was, and the other one was completed either shortly before or shortly after. Yes, we are hedging, but hey, this is a podcast and not a history book, and even those guys hedge sometimes. The other thing that we have to hedge is when and why the mansion got its name, because that too is unclear. It's thought that the name, spelled Baleroy, is an homage to Baleroy with two L's. That mansion is a fancy chateau, basically a castle, in the Normandy region of France. It's named Baleroy because that's the name of the village it was built in. Honestly, we wouldn't be shocked if this just became the name of our Philadelphia mansion because someone thought it sounded fancy. In any case, the story goes that the mansion's first owners were a carpenter and his wife, and that the former, for reasons lost to time, killed the latter. Now, the normal caveats apply to the story, strangers. We do not know the identities of these people, nor does, seemingly, anyone. Why would a carpenter have been wealthy enough to own a mansion? Did he build it himself? It's certainly strange in a neighborhood lauded for architecture to not know these things. This couple may not have even been real, but so the story goes. In 1926, the house was purchased by a prestigious family, the Easbys, who seemed to either not have known about the murder or to not have cared. And that's their business. But by prestigious, we really do mean that this family was a sort of American nobility. According to the Philadelphia Media Network, the Easby patriarch at that time would often tell his children that their ancestors sailed to America in 1683 on the same ship as William Penn, whose name was eventually bestowed on the state of Pennsylvania. And, to boot, the Easbys were related to at least 3 signatories to the Declaration of Independence. These were well-connected, well-to-do people. The house would stay in the Easby family's possession for many years, but problems started early for their small family, Mr. and Mrs. Easby and their 2 sons. According to Philly Ghosts, Shortly after the family bought the property, the youngest Easbys, George and Stephen, were playing outside in the mansion's courtyard. That courtyard had a grand fountain that seemed to be the boys' focus. Philly Ghost wrote that they were playing in the fountain and laughing at their wavy reflections in the water. At least they were, until Stephen's reflection changed into a skull. George's reflection remained normal. Both boys were frightened, but they didn't think much of it in the intervening years. According to WHYY, when little Stephen died in 1931 of an unspecified childhood illness, the family was devastated. And they also thought back to that incident that had scared the boys so badly a few years prior. Nothing paranormal had happened to the family before. George would grow up to inherit the mansion when his parents eventually passed away. Of old age, to be fair, and nothing more spooky than that. But WHYY reported that, once his parents died, George found himself with a manor to himself, and a lot of stuff. As an adult, he hired a team of housekeepers to keep the mansion orderly, and with many generations of wealthy, accomplished people to the Easby family name, there was a lot crammed into that mansion to show for it. Namely, artifacts. The Philadelphia Daily News wrote that George Easby was especially interested in collecting vintage cars, but the mansion also contained 300-odd years' worth of objects. There was a colonial-era table that eventually sold for millions of dollars, a silver tea set that Easby often loaned to the White House, letters from founding fathers, furniture that had belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte. Which is all very impressive on its own. But we promised you some spooky stuff, strangers, and we're thrilled to inform you that, surprise, some of these artifacts seem to be haunted. And they started acting like it once the elder Easbys had died, and George was alone in the mansion. As the Inquirer wrote in 1973, quote, "One particular 18th century cabinet in the house seemed outrageously spooked. The doors to the cabinet were permanently locked, the key long lost. However, one evening Easby was startled to discover the cabinet's doors opening and closing by themselves. The case even had the audacity to knock. When Easby peered into the cabinet, he was drawn to a miniature of his great-grandfather, which, for some inexplicable reason, impelled him to check his relative's will. In so doing, he discovered that he was entitled to a larger inheritance than he had received. And the cabinet with the tiny great-grandfather? It wasn't all. The Inquirer also mentioned an odd photograph stationed in Easby's blue room. As George himself told the paper, "I do not see it as clearly as others, but to me it appears as a bluish haze through which I can barely make out a face. This room was designed by my mother, and it seems if anything in the room is moved, a psychic phenomena occurs. It's almost as though Mother doesn't want anything moved." George would also reportedly see the apparition of his brother, Stephen, who you'll recall passed away as a boy. Other people saw him too, actually. Per WHYY, a pair of landscapers spotted him once. Quote, "David Belts and his friend were hired as landscapers at the time, and while working in the backyard, they saw a young boy with blonde hair looking at them from an upper floor window. They knew no children lived on the property, and after the incident, Belts' friend refused to work at Baleroy." Now, strangers, this has all been par for the course as far as hauntings are usually concerned. A strange, hazy face, a boy in a window, a family member gently guiding you to surprise money from the beyond. We saw passing mentions in both the Inquirer and in WHYY of other apparitions and goings-on, the usual electrical blackouts, phantom cars in the driveway, objects being picked up and flung around by invisible hands. Those are pretty benign. What we're about to discuss next is not.
Hey, it's Howie Mandel, and I am inviting you to witness history as me and my Howie Do It gaming team take on Gilly the King and Wallow 267's $1 Million Gaming in an epic global gaming league video game showdown. 4 rounds, multiple games, 1 winner, plus a halftime performance by multi-platinum artist Travie McCoy. Watch all the action and see who wins and advances to the championship match against Neo right now at globalgamingleague.com. That's globalgamingleague.com. Everybody games. Hey, it's Howie Mandel, and I am inviting you to witness history as me and my Howie Do It gaming team take on Gilly the King and Wallow 267's $1 million gaming in an epic Global Gaming League video game showdown. 4 rounds, multiple games, 1 winner, plus a halftime performance by multi-platinum artist Travie McCoy. Watch all the action and see who wins and advances to the championship match against Neo right now at globalgamingleague.com. That's globalgamingleague.com. Everybody games.
In 1976, the Inquirer wrote that there had been a death in George Easby's inner circle. His close friend, Paul Kimmins, who'd been acting as the mansion's art curator. Though really, by this account, he wasn't so much curating as he was sifting through piles of Easby's artifacts and cataloging them. As the Inquirer told it, a psychic who regularly visited the house noticed that a ghost was following Paul Kimmins, specifically. That psychic reportedly said that the ghost was of an arrogant young woman named Amanda. Paul heard about this and, frightened, confirmed that he'd seen a girl who matched that description. And then, quote, 2 weeks after the psychic mentioned that fact, Kimmins died suddenly and mysteriously. There seemed to be no physical or medical reason for his death, according to Easby. Could it have been the ghost of Amanda, whoever she was, that hastened Paul Kimmins' death? Well, strangers, far be it from us to tell you one way or the other. But death was not a stranger in the Baleroy Mansion either. According to the Chestnut Hill local, there was a floral printed chair stationed in the blue room that spirits, including Amanda, seemed especially attached to. The problem was that they were so attached that anyone who sat in the chair would die shortly after. Paul Kimmins had indeed sat in that chair. So did Catherine Scullin, George's housekeeper, who, you guessed it, shuffled off this mortal plane shortly thereafter. And there were potentially 2 other casualties, identities unknown. Philly Ghost wrote that George did eventually ban visitors from sitting in the death chair, which feels like a smart move, if a little overdue. But none of this death seemed to put a damper on George's socialite habits. Visitors came to the mansion pretty frequently, and typically, those visitors were in the psychical research realm. But there were others too. In May of 1989, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that George held a fundraising event at the mansion to support a local theater company. Per the Inquirer, there were dramatic readings of ghost stories, and George had hung photographs of a, quote, gauzy material that had appeared throughout the home, and been cleaned up, we guess, which is a real shame, because George claimed it was ectoplasm. And on that note, strangers, we should discuss George, because he aged into quite the character. Per the Inquirer, he never really had a job beyond socialite. He lived in the house alone, save for his companion, Toby. There is a catch with Toby, though. As the Inquirer so eloquently wrote, quote, Toby, who lives in a magnificent mansion in Chestnut Hill, spends a good part of his life screaming with fear because he lives in a haunted house. But then, what does Toby know? He is, after all, a parrot. Yes, Toby was in fact a parrot, and he did seem to have a sixth sense. As George told the Inquirer, quote, when the parrot screams and flies around in terror, chances are good that something ghostly is around. That's a handy skill, unless of course you're Toby, in which case it was probably kind of terrifying, all the time. We assume he had a harrowing life for a domesticated parrot. In 1992, the Inquirer ran a photo of Toby, who was still kicking, and more importantly of George, who then would have been in his 70s. It's a fantastic character study, we think. George is posed in a hallway of the mansion, surrounded by chandeliers and oil paintings. He's holding Toby, who looks good, we guess, by parrot standards. George himself has coiffed white hair, dark brows, and an expression somewhere between whimsical and ominous. The cheetah print tie probably contributes a little bit to the former vibe. George is described in almost every article we read as tall and handsome, and extraordinarily unbothered by the haunted house thing. As he told the Inquirer in 1976, "After all, it's my home, and I'm used to it. I've lived here since I was a child." George Easby died in 2005 at age 87, and leaving behind no children, the mansion was sold and various artifacts contained in the mansion were variously auctioned off or donated to museums. Did they stay haunted? We wish we could speak for each individual item, the death chair, the hazy photographs, and so on. But their new homes, wherever they are, have remained pretty tight-lipped. At some point, after George Easby's death, the Baleroy Mansion was open to tours, but it's since closed its doors. As far as we can tell, it is in fact being lived in and used as a private residence. Per the Chestnut Hill Local, the owners do occasionally speak to the press, anonymously, and we don't really blame them. As the Local wrote, quote, "The current residents of the Baleroy show a love for the history of the house and are respectful of the ghosts and the spirit of George. The couple's sons have grown up there and never showed any concern or fear of the house. They throw a lot of parties, especially around Halloween. And you know what? As they should, strangers. There are only so many ways a haunted house story can end, of course. There's the rare occasion that one is deemed irredeemably haunted and it's torn down. But generally, hauntings just tend to fizzle out. They die slowly and quietly, either because the angry spirits move on, they're cast out, or the people inside the home decide to just deal with it. Whatever the case might have been with the Baleroy Mansion, it certainly seems that its haunted house narrative ran its course and lives on only in local legend, in what we assume are excellent Halloween parties. Or it might have died out, except for one strange thing. And this is a strange thing that involves early 2000s indie rock icons. You have been warned. If you were by chance into the indie scene at the turn of the 21st century, you probably heard some songs by the Walkmen. They dropped their first album back in 2002. In 2012, they released what would be their last album, before going on a hiatus that lasted until about a year ago, actually. But anyway, that 2012 album had a song titled The Love You Love, and that song, when it was released as a single, had a music video, filmed, you guessed it, at the Baleroy Mansion. Now, we're not actually concerned with the music video itself, in case that wasn't obvious, but interestingly, members of the Walkmen claim that they had paranormal experiences shooting in that house, well after people had stopped talking about any active hauntings there. Our best source on those experiences is an interview that Sean Pecknold, the video's director, did with Urban Outfitters back in 2012. We are not kidding. As Sean told Urban Outfitters, the band didn't exactly set out for a haunted locale. "We shot in an old haunted house in Philadelphia, which Pete from the Walkmen found for us. I was looking for an old house with some empty rooms in it. So Pete found this old house, and it was supposedly one of the most haunted houses in all of Philadelphia." And when the intrepid PR person at Urban Outfitters asked about the spooky experiences at the house, Sean delivered. "We didn't find a death chair, which was a good thing, but we shot in the afternoon because shooting at night was just kind of out of the question. Then, as it was getting dark and when we were cleaning up all the gear, one of our assistants went upstairs to load up on the top floor, and she came back and was like, this place is definitely haunted." You really feel it when you're alone. Then, as we started gathering up all the gear, the house alarm went off and all the car alarms went off in the driveway. So that was kind of weird. There's definitely a strange energy there. Strangers, if Toby the parrot had been there, we assume that he would have screamed. But in a parody kind of way. Now, look, we're sure that weird stuff happens on indie music video shoots with some regularity. We are blissfully not plugged into that scene. But at this point, the Baleroy Mansion would have been a residential home without the revolving door of ghost enthusiasts that George Easby had fostered in life. The residents have not reported anything amiss in their home. So to have an incident pop up out of thin air when a band has an album to promote is interesting, let's say. But so is the reverence that the Walkmen seem to have had for the spiritual state of their location shoot. Remember, they said that filming at the mansion at night was out of the question. If they were after a spooky vibe in their video, and it seems like they were, that wasn't exactly a helpful line to draw in the production sand. So, we're left, strangers, as we often are, with an anecdote that we can't prove is genuine and an invitation for you to fill in the gaps as you wish. All we can say is, someone should get Gritty into this mansion. Stat, he'll probably be able to help, or, at the very least, he'll do something weird. And we'll eat it up when he does. We hope you'll join us next time for another premium exclusive episode of One Strange Thing. Oh, and if you wouldn't mind, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on your favorite podcast app. It helps us find more listeners.
Pro drivers live for race day, but for small business owners, every day is race day. That's why going pro with Lenovo Pro matters. One-on-one advice, IT solutions, and customized hardware powered by Intel Core Ultra processors keep your business on the right track. Business goes pro with Lenovo Pro. Sign up for free at lenovo.com/pro.
Lenovo.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA is heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.